Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of State of Mind. This will be part 14, the second half to chapter 11. Izuku met his old bully in the arena. Kachan wasn't smiling, only watching him with a calculating look in his eyes. It seemed that he had finally accepted that Izuku wasn't quirkless and hadn't been in a long time, and was actually taking Izuku seriously as an opponent. Izuku knew that Kachan was frustrated about it all, though, his aura reflecting it. He was definitely frustrated at how easily Izuku had defeated him during the first 8 battle trials. Izuku was sure he would take out all his years of irritation on him right now, despite having seemed a bit more mature as of late. Izuku was counting on that, though, hoping to take advantage of the boy's emotions and defeat him. Kachan was announced first, and Izuku tried desperately to ignore the anxiety welling up inside of him at the sight of Kachan glaring at him, hands fisted at his sides. Izuku wondered if he would ever get over his fears. Izuku's fingertips were torn up and bleeding by the time his name was announced. He barely even caught what Mike said about him this time, before he was screaming for the match to begin. A quick reaction would have the largest chance for success, so as soon as that word ended, Izuku kicked off. His best tactic was to get in close and grab Kachan. The entire match could be ended in a single touch, and Kachan knew it. His experience in their first battle was going to help Kachan more than it would help Izuku, actually being a hindrance to him. Kachan was fast in response to Izuku's charge, though, sparks popping along his palm before he sent an explosion toward Izuku, who threw his fist toward it, returning it right back to him, the fabric along his arm tearing off. Izuku was knocked back several feet from his own punch, losing some of the ground he had made up between them, the ground cracking beneath his feet from the force. Izuku was moving seemingly even before he could process what was going on after he stopped sliding. Kachan had dodged the blast that Izuku had sent back to him, and he rolled, jumping up to catch his breath, keeping an eye on Izuku. Izuku ran at him, keeping the match going fast, no stop. Kachan aimed another explosion at him, letting loose. Izuku dropped low to the ground, sliding on his knees as the curtain of fire swept over him, singeing the ends of his hair. Once he was free of the flames, Izuku fired off a punch at Kachan, the resulting air pressure throwing the boy up into the air and driving Izuku backward. He used the momentum to jump to his feet, as above him Kachan used the explosions from his hands to regulate where he flew, making sure he stayed in the lines. "You damn nerd!" Kachan howled, propelling himself toward Izuku, an aggressive scowl on his face. Izuku stumbled backward, eyes going wide, barely dodging the arms reaching for his face. His left hand came up instinctively, trying to grab a hold of the blonde's arm, but Kachan's other arm lashed out, grabbing his wrist, keeping his fingers away from him. Izuku panicked, attempting to yank his arm away instead of retaliating with his knees or his other hand. His eyes met Kachan's, and all he could see were the times the boy had thrown him against the walls of Aldera, or beat him in the dirt outside of the school, or sicked his lackeys on him. All Izuku could see was leaving the abuse at home to go into the fists of abuse at school, where the teachers ignored everything. Burning pain brought Izuku back to the present, to see the blue sky expanding all around him, and he gasped, feeling air rushing around him. He glanced back and saw the white line at the end of the arena rapidly approaching. "Shit!" he choked and forced his body to turn, punching the air so that the resulting air would take him back. He landed on his feet, sliding along the dirt right to the edge of the arena, so close to being over it and losing. He panted for breath, chest aching, eyes wide. His face was wet, from blood or tears Izuku didn't know, but he didn't have time to think about it because Kachan was charging him, yelling incoherently. A burst of fear and desperation struck through what felt like Izuku's very soul, and he lifted his left hand in an attempt to protect his face from the inevitable hit, his eyes clenched shut. But it never came. Absently, Izuku noticed the crowd had gone near silent, which was strange considering what was supposed to be going on. Izuku slowly opened his eyes, gasping in surprise. Kachan had stopped his assault and was staring at him with some expression that Izuku couldn't pinpoint. Izuku looked around him. It was raining, but the sky was bright and nothing was touching him. He looked more closely at the rain, eyes squinting for a second. Izuku suddenly inhaled sharply, pupils dilating and eyes widening as he realized what was going on. His quirk was activated, not one for all, but state of mind, and it wasn't taking. State of mind was giving, something akin to lava falling around him, forming a sort of protective circle. Izuku could see where it sank into the cement of the arena, turning it into a melted mess. None of it was touching Izuku, and he imagined if it did that it would not feel great. Izuku scanned Kacchan, noting how he was holding his arm. He must have been burnt whenever it had activated. Izuku lifted his head, eyes still wide, his mind remaining a mess of trauma and memories. Izuku screamed then, raging at everything that had happened to him. Then Izuku broke it off, powering one for all through him and leaping forward in a dead sprint toward the boy that was triggering so much hurt within him. Kacchan echoed his scream when the rain hit his skin, throwing a punch at him. Izuku took the explosion, the light momentarily blinding Kacchan from Izuku's incoming fist, impacting his chest and throwing him across the arena, all the way into the stadium wall, where he crumbled to the bottom in an unmoving heap. Izuku stood there, stunned, arm dropping to his side. The world was silent, only a buzzing sound in his ears. The rain still fell. Izuku could feel the heat from it. Kacchan began moving, struggling to get up, sending a weird look at Izuku. Kacchan's mouth moved. He was shouting at him, but Izuku couldn't hear anything right now. He shifted his gaze slightly when a purple smoke appeared on the edge of his vision. Midnight was there, right at the end of where his lava rain was reaching. She had ripped her sleeve, a worried look on her face directed at Izuku as she met his eyes. Izuku looked around. He was surrounded by the smoke, breathing it in. "Oh," he breathed, before his eyes rolled into the back of his head, and he hit the ground, hard. Suddenly there was everything. Izuku shot up, a choked scream bursting from him. "Whoa, Izuku," a voice said, and Izuku flinched to the side, away from the sound, his entire body shaking and reacting. His eyes lifted to meet light blue, and he took a second, tears slowly obscuring his vision. "Oh, Izuku," Yagi murmured, before moving from his chair and over to him, pulling him into his arms and against his chest. Izuku allowed himself to cry, harsh sobs racking his small form. He wasn't panicking, he was in control. He needed this cry, it needed out. Yagi said something over his head, and Recovery Girl's voice answered, then the sound of a door opening and closing. Izuku remembered his mind turning on him, confusing him with past memories. My head is so fucked up," Izuku moaned against his idol's chest. Yagi rubbed his back, his chest rumbling with his voice. "Izuku, you can recover. You will recover, but it's going to take time and practice. I have no doubt that you can do it." Izuku didn't answer that, his mind recalling everything that had happened. The fight, how he felt with Kacchan, the rain, the end. Suddenly, a soft chuckle began in Izuku's chest, building into what was almost a laugh. Yagi leaned back, holding Izuku's shoulders as he wiped at his face. "What is it, my boy?" Izuku snorted, the corner of his lips lifting. "I yeeted Kacchan. Holy shit, I yeeted Kacchan." Yagi frowned, brows drawn together in confusion. "I don't quite understand, young Izuku. Yeeted." A sharp choking sound rasped out of Izuku, a mix between a guffaw and sob, and Izuku fell backward into the cot, holding his stomach. Yagi rubbed the back of his own head worriedly. "Perhaps we should check you again for a concussion." Izuku, calming down, shook his head, the twisted smile fading from his face. "No, it's all right. It's just... my emotions are all over the place. It's okay." Yagi nodded in understanding. "Well, that is to be expected. You won the sports festival, and a new part of your quirk made itself known." Izuku frowned, looking away. "Midnight had to make me stop." Yagi sighed, setting a finger under Izuku's chin and lifting his head up. "Your strong emotions drew it out. It's okay that you couldn't stop it right away." Izuku shook his head, fighting tears again. "You don't understand." He searched his mentor's eyes. Izuku gritted his teeth in frustration. How did he describe everything? "At first, I couldn't see clearly. I couldn't tell what was real, and then when it ended, I couldn't..." Izuku looked away again. "You were disassociating." Izuku looked up at Yagi's words and nodded in surprise. I know what disassociating is, my boy. I've been around a while. And besides, you've done it before around me. Of course I would do my own research. Izuku's eyes filled with admiration and awe, and Yagi smiled at him. We better get going. I need to give out medals, and you need to be there to receive yours. Izuku nodded, still struck by the amount of care this man had for him. Izuku was surprised with every kind gesture the number one hero showed him, wondering what he had done in his life to deserve such treatment. Izuku stood, wincing at the pain that spread across his skin, especially his face. Izuku suddenly looked up at Yagi, fear in his eyes. Don't worry, Recovery Girl healed just about everything. You took an explosion in the face, but it... Did it scar? Izuku interrupted almost desperately. He didn't want any more burn scars, gods. Izuku really didn't want any more burn scars. He already had so many, not his face. Yagi's face softened. The skin will be tender for a bit, but no, there's no burn scar on your face. Izuku exhaled in relief, shoulders dropping. Sorry, he murmured. Don't be sorry, young Izuku, Yagi reassured. It is a valid concern. Yagi inflated into his muscle form, and they headed out of the room together. Is Kachan okay? Izuku finally asked, on their way to the stadium. He had several broken ribs, and the rain you summoned burnt him a bit, but he's okay, Yagi answered truthfully. Izuku nodded, looking down at his feet. You go on ahead. I'll be making an entrance. He gave Izuku a wink before running down a different hallway and disappearing around a corner. Izuku sighed and headed down his own hallway, scratching at his arms. He hadn't changed this time, so all the scars on his arms were bared, including the new one that Todoroki had given him on his right bicep. It was a medium-sized scar, compared to his other ones, and when he looked down at it, he realized it was kind of shaped like a star. This would be the first scar that he had attained with good memories attached to it. Kachan and Todoroki were already at their places when Izuku walked to the area beneath the arena and climbed the steps up to the first-place spot. Apparently, they were going to be dramatically raised up into the arena. Izuku folded his arms behind his back to resist picking at his fingers when he settled on his spot. Looking down and to his right, where Kachan stood angrily, his arms folded over his chest, staring pointedly away from Izuku. Izuku frowned at the small scars that now peppered the blonde's arms from Izuku's lava rain. A nasty, guilty feeling wormed its way into Izuku's heart at the sight, and he looked away. Izuku turned his attention to Todoroki, who looked up at him upon catching sight of Izuku's eyes shifting over to him. Todoroki raised an inquisitive brow at him, as if asking if he was all right. Izuku just shrugged in answer right before Cementos spoke from the side, telling them to get ready. Almost immediately after that, the pillars they stood on began to raise until they ascended into the stadium above, the sounds of the cheering crowd all of a sudden obnoxiously loud, and Izuku found his hands twitching with the urge to reach up and cover his ears. All Might was announced, and then he dropped to their levels, medals clutched in his hands. Izuku partially tuned the world out as people yelled and cheered and medals were given, though he was pleasantly surprised to see that All Might gave Todoroki a hug. Izuku smiled. That boy needed all the hugs that he could get. The man had attempted to hug Kachan, but that of course hadn't gone well. When All Might got to Izuku, he restrained his eagerness to lean into a hug, only dipping his head to allow him to put the first-place medal over his head, to settle on his chest, before being pulled into a hug. Great job, my boy. I'm proud of you. Izuku's fists clenched, and he bit the inside of his cheek hard enough to draw blood. No one said those words to him ever. And now, so many times in one day, and he had been told by Yagi that he was proud of Izuku. It was too much. He could barely hold back the tears, but he wouldn't cry in front of everyone. He was stronger than that. Then the ceremony was done, and the sports festival was finally done. The rest of the day passed by in a chaotic blur until finally everyone was back in class, back in their uniforms after their showers. Izuku was practically draped over his desk, his entire body aching. He didn't want to imagine how he would feel in the morning. Good job during the festival, everyone. There will be no school tomorrow or the day after, Aizawa announced flatly. I'm sure the pros who watch will want to recruit you, but we'll consolidate everything and announce it when you get back. So rest well and look forward to that." They were dismissed after that. Izuku glanced back to where Ida's empty seat resided. Uraraka had told him about Ingenium earlier, and how Ida had rushed off to be with him in the hospital. Izuku was worried about his friend. He would try to remember to text him before he passed out later. Izuku stood, and after forcing himself to endure the congratulations of his classmates, he shoved his medal into his bag and headed to the teacher's lounge. He walked directly past Aizawa chastising Mike about something, past Yagi trying to get Izuku's attention, past Midnight and Sekijiro arguing about canned food for some reason, and promptly dropped onto the empty couch. Face first, his eyes closed. The room went silent for a moment, only a small chuckle from Aizawa. "We're almost done, little listener. Then we'll go home," Mike's voice said apologetically, from next to his husband. Izuku grunted in response, turning his face into the back of the couch and pulling his knees to his chest. He was utterly exhausted. A weight settled beside his head, and a hand patted through his messy hair. Izuku sighed, allowing some of the tension to ease away. "Yagi," he mumbled quietly, brain foggy. "Yes, my boy," Yagi answered. "Thank you," he whispered. "Why?" Yagi asked, frowning. Izuku didn't answer, falling asleep. He would just sleep a little. It was already twilight, and he had had a long day. A soft voice in his ear pulled Izuku's consciousness slightly out of the depths. "All right, problem child, wake up. Let's head home." Izuku turned his head and cracked one eye part of the way open. "Mm-mm," he grumbled. "I must stay. Soft." He nuzzled his head against the couch cushion. Aizawa sighed. "Do not make me carry you again." Izuku sighed, a little bit of awareness returning. He pulled himself into a sitting position, head lolling slightly on his shoulders. He grabbed for his bag, but Aizawa swiped it. "I've got it." Izuku mumbled something that might have possibly been thanks in some unknown language before he stood, head pulsing in pain. He grumbled beneath his breath as they walked down the UA hallways. Aizawa watched him out of the corner of his eye, remembering the sight of the glistening rain the boy had summoned, wondering how many aspects of his quirk he had yet to uncover. He truly was incredibly powerful. He didn't think that the boy even recognized how powerful he was, how much potential there was in him, in a quirk like that. They reached the car, Mike already there, smiling when he caught sight of a racer guiding a sleepy green-haired boy alongside him. Izuku climbed into the back seat, pulling his phone from his pocket. There was a message from Yagi, and Izuku immediately opened it. It was a short message letting him know that there was no need for training the next 2 days, and to get some rest. He had earned it. Izuku sent his mentor a meme someone had made about All Might in answer, before pulling up Ida's contact to direct message him on the app they used. May 7th, at 1922. "Uraraka told me what happened. I just wanted to make sure that you knew you could message any of us if you need anything, or would like to talk." Izuku hit send, and watched it for a minute, but nothing happened. Sighing, he turned back to click open the group chat he was in. There were a couple messages in it from his friends. May 7th, at 17:08. "Hey, lost in thought. You seem to leave in a hurry. Are you okay?" "He was probably just tired. I know I am, and I didn't literally make it rain fire." Izuku had almost forgotten that they had given each other names based on their quirks, and the side of his mouth lifted in a half-smile. Uraraka had given Kirishima the name Raken, and the red-haired boy had loved it. Of course, Kirishima had given Todoroki the name Icy Hot, which he had been less than enthusiastic about. Izuku would just have to change it back to Peppermint eventually. May 7th, at 1924. "I am so tired, guys." "He lives!" "Today was so crazy. The one-on-ones were so intense." "Yeah, your match with Bakugo was a lot. I just realized the 3 of us here fought Bakugo." "Oh yeah, you're right." "Great job defeating him, Deku." "It was close, though. Really close." "What was with that rain, dude?" "I don't know. It was new." "Oh, we just arrived. I'm gonna go sleep for a year. See you guys later." Lost in thought has left. The car pulled in, and Aizawa climbed out of the car first, unlocking the door, Izuku's bag in his hand. Mike waited for Izuku to get out, his body complaining. As soon as Aizawa had the door open, Izuku was taking off his shoes and moving toward the couch, face-planting it, his body all over the place. Wink somehow appeared from seemingly nowhere and jumped onto his back. Mike laughed when he saw them, walking in behind them. "He looks like a badly drawn chalk outline," Shota muttered, setting the bag by the door and removing his shoes. Mike's laugh caught in his throat, turning into a snort. Shota pulled his capture weapon off and laid it on the coffee table, kicking Midoriya's legs off the couch so he could lay down, his eyes heavy. Midoriya grumbled, pulling himself into a ball. Shota shoved his leg next to the boy, stretching out as far as possible, the other leg hanging off the side of the couch, his head draped back against the arm of the couch, hair skimming across the floor. His eyes slipped closed, and he was asleep in minutes. Hizashi had watched everything, one hand over his heart. He snapped a picture of the two of them and sent it to Murray, with the caption, "Tired babies." After that, he set to work on dinner. When Shota woke up, he found a grinning Hizashi in his face and a finger over his lips. He pointed over and Shota frowned, following the line of his finger. One thing Shota had noticed while Midoriya stayed with him was that he always slept curled up as tightly as possible, especially if someone else was in the room. It had always been something, Shota had noted sadly, that probably had something to do with his past experiences, sleeping around people that he didn't trust. But if Shota thought too hard about it, it hurt his heart, so he tried not to. Shota didn't think he had ever seen Midoriya sleep in any other position until now. Midoriya had stretched out in his sleep, his legs overtaking Shota's own, one foot on Shota's thigh, and the other slipping off the couch. His arm had fallen off the side to lay curled against the floor, and his left hand was pillowing his head against the couch cushion. Wink was literally laying on the boy's head, her tail wrapped around his neck like a scarf. "I took like 15 pictures, Hizashi whispered to Shota. "Delete them," Shota immediately responded, sitting up, Midoriya's leg falling off of him. "Never," was Hizashi's easy answer, turning his back to head back into the kitchen. "Food's almost ready." Shota sighed. Why did he always have to wake Midoriya up? Oh yeah, because Izuku had tried to decapitate Shota's husband in his sleep. "Midoriya, food's ready," he grunted, tapping the boy's cheek between Wink's legs. His eyes flickered halfway open, and then shifted to look at Shota, still partially asleep. "Food's ready," Shota repeated. Midoriya yawned, and then reached up to remove Wink from his head. He snuggled her for a second, and Shota stood, yawning as well. He scratched his collarbone and shuffled to the kitchen, wrapping his arms around his husband's waist and laying his head on his shoulder. Hizashi smiled, reaching up to pat the side of his head. Behind them, Midoriya zombie walked into the kitchen and collapsed into a chair, his head audibly thunking against the wood of the table. "How is he so much like you?" Hizashi asked, glancing at the boy. The hair on the left side of his head was spread out along the table in messy waves. Shota shrugged and then released him. "You sit down. I'll finish up," he told the man. Hizashi sighed, and then went to sit next to Midoriya, who appeared to have actually fallen asleep again. He must really be exhausted, Hizashi thought fondly. Aizawa shook Izuku's shoulder after finishing up the food, setting a plate in front of him. Izuku lifted his head. His forehead had a bright red spot on it, from where it had been pressed into the wood. Aizawa set out the rest of the plates and sat down to eat. Hizashi tried to make conversation as they ate, but the most he got from either of his company were grunts or grumbles, so he gave it up. Aizawa cleared the table when they finished, and Izuku found his way back to the couch, pulling his phone out. There was no response from Ida, but his eyes fell on the message from his mom, and his lips thinned. He debated answering it, but eventually decided that it was a problem for tomorrow's Izuku. Izuku turned his phone off and laid down, looking around the room, at Wink bathing herself by his feet, at the two men he had come to care about like family, cleaning and gathering things and doing whatnot. Izuku cleared his throat, and they both looked over at him. Aizawa's brow raised. "Thank you," Izuku said after a moment of hesitation, chewing his fingernails. "Thank you for letting me stay with you. For everything." Of course, little listener. It's been great having you. You know that, right? Mike said, taking a couple steps toward him. Izuku looked away and shrugged. Mike walked over to crouch in front of him. You know, Sho has mentioned a little bit of your situation, but we don't really know that much. Yeah, Izuku murmured, and then sighed, as if resigned. There's too much to say. My dad left a long time ago. I think he's actually a villain somewhere, but I don't know for sure. My mom left shortly after, but visits sometimes. I told Yagi more. You can ask him if you want. What is your connection with that man? Aizawa came forward then. You know his name, even though it's a national secret. Izuku stiffened, before leaning back and rubbing his temple. It's not my place to tell. Ask him. Sorry. And with that the boy turned, successfully blocking them out. The couple shared a look before going back to their nightly duties, leaving him alone. Hizashi woke up the next morning, well rested, Aizawa's arms around him, his head pushed in between his shoulder blades, and his breath hot against his bare skin. Hizashi rolled to his other side, admiring his hero. He reached over to smooth a thumb over the scar under the man's eye with a sigh. Shota leaned into the touch, and Hizashi smiled. His stomach rumbled then, and he silently rolled out of the bed, pulling on some clothes so that their ward wouldn't be embarrassed, and then headed to the kitchen. Midoriya, he whispered. Are you awake? The mound on the couch shifted, and a single emerald eye peered out at him from the pile of pillows and blankets. Yeah, the boy's voice answered softly, and it sounded strange. Hizashi frowned and walked over to him. Are you all right? He asked, standing next to the couch. Midoriya pulled his head farther from the blanket. It's difficult to explain, he said, and that definitely worried Hizashi. Can you try? He frowned. Midoriya looked away, staring at the back of the couch. I have depression, he said, almost too softly to be heard. And today is a bad day. Ah, Hizashi answered sadly. He supposed it made sense. The boy had expended a lot of emotion yesterday. Would a hug help? Midoriya shrugged, and Hizashi took that as an affirmative, crouching down in front of the boy. Midoriya slowly sat up, the area beneath his eyes dark and his eyes dull. Hizashi's heart panged with sadness for the boy. Hizashi spread his arms, and Midoriya leaned into him, setting his head against Hizashi's shoulder. The voice hero wrapped his arms tightly around him, hugging him against him. Neither of them made a sound, Hizashi only offering the comfort of a hug. Eventually Midoriya moved back, no change in him. Thank you, he murmured, before burying himself back beneath the blankets and pillows. Hizashi's frown deepened, and he stood up. Is there anything we can do to help, Midoriya? No, he answered, his voice muffled. Just being here helps. Being with people. You. Hizashi's breath stuttered in his chest, and he wiped a hand down his face, fighting tears, struck with the thought that Midoriya had probably dealt with days like this on his own. Foregoing breakfast, Hizashi sat down next to the boy's body in its ball form, and turned on the TV, switching it to some movie before relaxing into the arm of the couch. I'm not going anywhere, Midoriya, he said, and patted his foot beneath the blanket gently. He would not let this boy suffer alone, if he could help it. A couple days later, Aizawa walked into class as seriously as always and stood behind the podium to face the classroom, clearing his throat. Sensei, it appears Mineta is not here. Ida thrust his hand up, getting Aizawa's attention. Aizawa looked out over all the students. Mineta will not be returning to this class, after many complaints and several lectures with nothing learned. The final straw was him trying to look into the girls' locker room. We will have a general education student joining us in his place. Thank goodness, someone whispered from somewhere within the class. Aizawa looked toward the doorway, and in walked a tall boy with sharply angled purple hair. Introduce yourself. Izuku straightened in his seat, smiling. He waved at the boy, who glanced at him bored. My name is Shinso Itoshi. I'll be your new classmate. Shinso, take your seat behind Midoriya so we can get to the matter at hand, Aizawa commanded, and Shinso nodded, moving toward Izuku. We can finally have that conversation. Izuku looked back excitedly as Shinso sat down. Shinso shrugged at him before looking back up at their teacher. Izuku smiled and did the same. Izuku was determined to help Shinso, and he was glad that he was in the class now. He had never liked Mineta anyway. No one did, really. In the end, he was surprised the boy hadn't been made to leave sooner. We're having a special hero informatics class today. The class collectively leaned forward as Aizawa added. Code names. Izuku bit the inside of his cheek at that. He had some ideas for a hero name for himself, but nothing super concrete. He crossed his arms over his chest and leaned back. He caught sight of Todoroki out of the corner of his eye, and he tapped his chin thoughtfully. Maybe he did have one strong idea. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 11 of State of Mind. Chapter 12 will be up next. Please let me know what you thought of this chapter. I thought it was great how the fight went down between Izuku and Kachan, and I really like the way the author is building up some more Dad Zawa and Dad Mike in there as well. So let me know what you all thought, and as always, thank you all so much for listening.